snow draped the world like a pall, unrelenting and absolute. The remnants of civilization lay buried beneath slab upon slab of ice, broken buildings poking from the crystallized crust like the ribs of massive, long-dead beasts. On days when the wind howled across the plains, it sounded like the earth itself groaning, lamenting its frozen metamorphosis. Most humans had perished during the cataclysmic drop in temperature, and those who remained learned to scrape out their existence atop the unyielding glaciers. They lived in pockets and enclaves, huddled around scarce sources of heat, connected by a few faint lines of commerce and communication. Survival depended on limited resources and the ability to traverse the vast, open expanses of ice, where storms could blind a traveler in minutes. Amid this harsh new world, travelers sailed on rickety ice skiffs. These vessels were crafted from steel, scavenged from ruined cities, with pointed bows that could slice across treacherous frozen seas. Controlled by tattered sails made of patchworked fabric, each skiff was a testament to human ingenuity and desperation. Between storms, they scattered across the endless plains, moving between outposts, and, if rumor were to be believed, from one empire to the next, though few believed any real empire still existed, unless one counted the fearsome frozen empire that allegedly ruled over scattered enclaves in the north. A lone figure stood on the deck of a skiff drifting through the swirling snow. Tall and lean beneath their heavy furs, they clung to the rigging to keep balance. Their name was Silas. Years had chipped away at Silas's illusions about this world, but a flicker of hope remained that maybe life could be different somewhere else, away from the enforced tyranny that lived in rumor. The skiff's hull glided with a rasping whisper against the slick crust of ice, propelled by the faint wind. Anxious to reach safer ground before nightfall, Silas scanned the horizon for a suitable place to camp. Mountains of ice folded the landscape into a jagged labyrinth, where illusions of distance could disorient even the most experienced traveler. His passenger, a woman named Mira, crouched in the cockpit behind a tattered tarp, scanning their route with a binocular contraption that magnified the white monotony. She raised a hand. "North-northeast," she called, voice muffled by her face wrap. "I think I see a faint glow. Could be a settlement's lights." Silas adjusted the rudder, guiding the skiff toward the glow. Settlements meant potential supplies, but also danger. Some outposts were rumored to be run by raiders who took advantage of strangers. Desperation sometimes forged alliances, but more often it bred distrust and hatred. Yet, in a world permeated by cold, any chance at shelter was worth the risk. They spent an hour zigzagging around ridges of ice and crevasses large enough to swallow half a city block. The wind picked up, ruffling the skiff's makeshift sail, and tiny shards of ice whirled around their faces. Mira kept watch, her eyes frequently darting around them for signs of intruders or weather shifts. She had grown adept at reading the interplay of clouds, scanning for the silver veil of oncoming blizzards. "Let's keep the sail half open," she suggested. "We don't want to race in too fast." Silas nodded, pulling ropes to reduce the sail's surface area. Though battered, the skiff responded promptly, slowing to a gentler pace. The faint glow gained clarity, sharpening into the sight of a small settlement perched on an outcrop that jutted from a rolling cliff of ice. Several huts formed a circle around a central tower, and the flicker of torches along the hut's walls offered a semblance of warmth. A single-masted sail, reminiscent of an older skiff, rose from the settlement's center, perhaps to catch the daylight or to mark the place against the endless sky. They docked the skiff where a few other vessels rested, lumps in the low light. Silas hopped off, boots crunching on hardened drifts. Mira followed, scanning the perimeter for movement. Together they approached the settlement's outer ring of huts, where a small group of figures quickly emerged, armed with spears fashioned from sharpened scrap metal. The leader was a woman whose cheeks were wind-burned, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "State your purpose," she demanded. "We need shelter and some supplies if you have them to spare," Silas said, keeping hands visible in a sign of peace. "We can trade, or help with chores." Mira stepped forward. "We have salvage from a city we passed, and some furs we can bargain with, or any labor you need." The group exchanged glances. Finally, the leader lowered her spear. "You can come in, but no trouble. We've had enough of it lately. My name is Adelina." Once inside the central courtyard, they felt a trickle of warmth from the flickering torches, and a small vent where the settlers had created an improvised geothermal pump. The settlement's dwellings huddled around this warm vent, like birds in the snow. Silas and Mira were handed cups of scalding broth that they drank eagerly, savoring every ability to chase away the pervasive chill that lived in their bones. "Where are you headed?" Adelina asked, her tone cautious, yet vaguely hospitable. "To the northeast," Silas replied, "a place rumored to be out of the Frozen Empire's reach. Some claim there's farmland there, or at least a microclimate that supports some greenery." She grimaced. "You'd be best to avoid that route. The Frozen Empire's patrols have increased, and they're pushing outward. They'll seize anything they come across. Food, fuel, slaves." Mira set her empty cup down. "We've heard rumors, but we need a path to freedom. There's nothing left for us here except scraping by, day after day." Adelina shook her head, a faint sadness behind her steel gaze. "We used to be free out here, distant from any empire or faction, but the storms grew worse. Supplies grew scarcer. We had no choice but to trade with caravans claiming they represented the Frozen Empire, and once they had a foothold, we were forced to bend the knee. They expect tributes of salvage, food, and slaves. They say those who resist are taken to the prison city." An uneasy silence settled. Silas knew what it meant to fear enslavement. He and Mira had once barely escaped a settlement-turned-forced labor camp. They had seen men, women, and children chained to heavy rigs, forced to hack through ice in search of precious metals. The thought of returning to that life made his stomach churn. A young scout burst into the courtyard, panting. "Patrol on the horizon, Adelina. Looks like 3 skiffs well armed." Adelina cursed under her breath. "They're early." She gestured for Silas and Mira to follow. "We'll hide you. If they see strangers here, it might provoke them. We can't risk an uprising right now." They hurried to one of the huts, where Adelina lifted a trap door in the floor, revealing a cramped cellar. Silas and Mira climbed down, quickly pulling the hatch shut. Through tiny gaps in the wooden planks, they glimpsed movement outside. Muffled voices floated in, gradually growing louder until they became harsh commands. Silas recognized the abrupt manner of a conquering force. "It's the tribute," came a voice from above. "We've brought your allotment of fuel. Now meet our demands." Someone from the settlement tried to argue, but a clattering crash ended the conversation. Silas's hands balled into fists. Mira, too, tensed, as if ready to burst out and fight, but they both knew that fighting now would endanger everyone. They endured several grating minutes of raised voices and scuffles. Eventually, heavy boots stomped away, and the sound of skiffs sailing off signaled the patrol's departure. Adelina returned and lifted the trap door. Her face was set in grim anger. "No casualties this time. They took some of our young men with them, though. They demanded new blood for labor or whatever else they do on those giant rigs." She exhaled. "We'd fight if we could, but we're ill-equipped to wage war against them." Silas stepped out, adjusting his coat. "I'm sorry. That's horrible." Turning to him with renewed resolve, Adelina asked, "Are you serious about going north, beyond Frozen Empire lands?" "Yes," Mira said firmly. "If we live, we might come back to help. That is, if we find a place that can muster enough resistance." Adelina nodded. "A few have tried to slip through that region. Most ended up captured. But if you're set on this path, I'll give you some supplies. Just promise you'll return if you discover a route or find allies beyond." That night, after a somber meal shared with the settlement, Silas and Mira slept in one of the huts. The near silence of the outside night pressed in on them, broken only by the occasional moan of the wind and the shifting ice. In this quiet, they each remembered better days, times of green landscapes, unpolluted skies, and bustling city streets. But those days vanished when the glaciers advanced, unstoppable and cruel. Morning arrived with a pale dawn, so muted it was hard to tell day from night. They readied their skiff while Adelina and a few others brought bundles of dried meat, sacks of powdered tea, and a small jar of medicines. Adelina also offered them a battered rifle with a few rounds of ammunition. "It's not much," she said, but it might save your life." Silas thanked her with a nod, stowing the rifle carefully. Mira strapped down the supplies, and soon they were off, gliding over the ice field once more. They directed their skiff northeast, passing through twisted canyons of ancient glaciers. Along the way they spotted bleached bones half buried in ice, possible remains from caravans that had never made it to their destination. For 3 days they sailed, each night hunkering down against jagged outcroppings of ice, every breath curling into clouds before them. They kept themselves warm by burning bits of scavenged material in a tiny stove. Tension coiled in each day, an uneasy awareness that they were entering territory monitored by the Frozen Empire's patrols. Mira constantly surveyed the horizon through her binocular contraption, searching for signs of dust, trails, or sails. Late on the 4th day, they crested a ridge and beheld a sight that pinned them both in uneasy awe. An enormous ice plain stretching into the distance, dotted with blocky towers like the buttresses of a gigantic fortress. Silas realized it wasn't a natural formation, but a vast system of spires, walls, and scaffolding built right into the glacier. Steam rose from vents in the ice, and blinding searchlights occasionally swept across the plains. "That must be one of their prison cities," Mira whispered. "I never believed the rumors about its size, but it's real." From the vantage point they could discern skiffs moving in and out of the labyrinth below. Dark shapes of guards manned the walls, carrying what looked like energy rifles, or at least advanced weaponry. The entire place seemed to seethe with an oppressive atmosphere, a center of control that spread across the surrounding glacial territories. Any attempt to sail near that fortress would be suicide. They decided to circle around, staying at a safe distance behind the horizon's contour. Night brought cover, though it also brought the biting cold. With sails drawn, they inched their way around the perimeter. The moan of distant machinery echoed across the plains, reminding them that they were navigating the edge of a realm under the yoke of the Empire. Silas, struggling to steady the skiff in unexpected gusts, clenched his jaw whenever a searchlight arced too close. On the 2nd night of threading that bypass route, they took refuge in a hollow where glacial walls soared to either side, providing some shelter from the wind. As they worked to light a small stove, exhaustion stamped their features. Mira poured some water to boil, letting the swirling steam rise into the air. Silas rummaged through the bag Adelina had given them, retrieving the small jar of medicines to soothe his chapped skin. "Did you hear that?" Mira froze, dipping her head to listen. A faint grinding sound, like metal scraping across ice, came from somewhere above the ridge. Silas extinguished the small flame, plunging them into darkness. They listened intently. Once again they heard the low rumble of engines, followed by the hiss of compressed air. "Could be a patrol," Mira mouthed. They both crouched down, hearts hammering. As the minutes crawled by, lights hovered above the ridge, blue beams of flashlights or lanterns. Silas steadied the rifle, though he knew it would do little against the Empire's well-equipped soldiers. Then came the crunch of boots. A pair of silhouettes loomed, scanning the hollow with a slow sweep of their beams. Silas's grip tightened on the weapon. The patrol advanced a few more steps, then turned away, apparently satisfied no one was there. It was an agonizing wait, certain at any moment they might hear the bark of a commanding voice, but the footsteps and lights grew distant until the night reclaimed its quiet. Only then did Silas and Mira exhale. "That was too close," Silas mumbled, carefully setting the rifle aside. "We'll need to move before dawn. If they're searching these passes, we can't without rekindling the flame." They repacked their gear by the dim glow of Mira's hand-cranked flashlight. A biting wind stung their faces when they emerged from the hollow, but it was better to brave it than risk detection. They set sail under the veil of night, steering by the faint shimmer of stars. The journey stretched on, feeling endless in the frigid darkness, but eventually the horizon began to lighten, and the black glaciers took on a ghostly blue hue. Old and weary, they finally dared to pause near a ridge in the distance. A flour-like powdering of snow made the ice beneath dangerously slick. They anchored their skiff by driving metal spikes into a section of exposed rock, then wedged themselves into a cleft, hoping to regain a little energy before sunrise. Silas tried to sleep, but images of patrols and prison cities tormented him. The shifting of ice, the wind's lament, everything seemed to echo with the inevitability of the Empire's expansion. When the sky grew lighter, Mira gently shook Silas awake. "Time to go," she said, glancing up at the faint orange glow in the east. "The next leg could be the hardest." They pushed on, weaving carefully around narrower passes. In the distance, they saw the massive shape of the glacial fortress receding into the west as they skirted its perimeter. By midday, clouds gathered overhead, dark and ominous. The wind picked up unexpectedly, whipping snow in fierce squalls. Experiencing a sudden jolt of fear, Silas realized the ice beneath them was fracturing, the cracks forming jagged lines that radiated outward. Mira shouted, "We've got to move! The storm's created a shift in the ice!" They hastily unfurled the sails. Gusts caught them, propelling the skiff across the accelerating fracture. The crackles underneath echoed like thunder. They navigated around chunks of ice that were splitting apart, creating channels of slush and water. At one point, the skiff nearly plunged into a sudden fissure. Only Silas's swift pull on the rudder and Mira's sharp turn of the sail saved them. The craft skidded across a precariously narrow bridge of ice, teetering before righting itself on firmer ground. Eventually, they outran the shift, and the sound of breaking plates faded behind them. They glided into a calmer zone, an expansive plateau where snow settled in a soft blanket. Heart pounding, Silas took a moment to breathe, leaning on the rigging. "That was," he began, only to be cut off when Mira pointed toward the horizon. Dark silhouettes approached, emerging like phantoms from the swirling wind. 4, maybe 5 skiffs, each one outfitted with a strong sail and bearing the distinctive insignia of the Frozen Empire, a stylized snowflake inside a gear. They were spread out, forming a blockade up ahead. One skiff at the center seemed larger, with a mounted cannon glinting on its side. Mira hissed, "They must have heard about us trying to pass around their territory. They're cutting off the route." Silas felt a cold lump in his stomach. "We can't outrun them in these conditions." The Empire's skiffs drew closer, their sails snapping loudly in the wind. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker, distorted but clear enough. "Halt, you are entering restricted territory. Surrender or be destroyed." There was no choice left. They had gambled on evasion and lost. Mira looked at Silas, a mixture of determination and resignation in her eyes. They had the rifle, but that was hardly enough to stave off a patrol of heavily armed skiffs. Silas weighed their options. Surrender might lead them to forced labor or execution. Fighting back seemed equally hopeless. "We're not going to die cowering," Mira growled, picking up the rifle. "One well-placed shot might at least give us a chance to slip away." Before she could fire, a new sound split the air. An echoing roar, followed by tremors that rattled the ice beneath them. The lead Empire skiff slewed sideways, its crew struggling with the rudder. From behind a towering shard of ice, another skiff appeared, this one bearing no emblem, only black sails. Its front deck held a jury-rigged catapult that launched something large and flaming at the Empire's vehicles. The projectile crashed into the second Empire skiff, splintering its hull in a sudden burst of fire. Flaming chunks of wood and metal scattered across the ice. Immediately, the Empire's larger skiff returned fire with its cannon, but the black-sailed raiders were quick, darting in a series of evasive maneuvers. One more flaming projectile soared overhead, and the Empire's formation dissolved into a chaotic scramble. Silas wasted no time. "Now!" he yelled at Mira, yanking the rudder. Seizing the sudden opportunity, they angled their own craft to slip through the break in the blockade. Twisting sharply around the swirling melee, they narrowly missed being struck by a chunk of debris. The Empire's attention was focused on the raiders, and Silas took advantage of that precious opening. Mira fired a single shot from their rifle, more to cause confusion than anything else. The wind filled their sail, propelling them beyond the front lines of battle. Adrenaline flooded Silas's veins. He glimpsed the black-sailed skiff cutting a bold path among the Empire patrols, tossing flaming bundles at them with near-reckless abandon. The raiders, apparently no friends of the Frozen Empire, seemed to thrive in small-scale ambushes. Soon, the fight receded behind a veil of snow, only the distant thuds and flashes warning that it was still ongoing. Silas guided their skiff farther northeast, hoping the battle bought them enough time to escape the Empire's net. Eventually, the sound subsided entirely, and the only noise was the persistent wail of the wind. In the distance, the sun began its slow, pale descent, painting the icy plains with a cold gray light. They pressed on for another hour until they found refuge behind a towering berg. Under its shadow they halted, trembling with a mixture of relief and leftover fear. Sliding off the deck, Silas stood on shaky legs, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Mira collapsed against the skiff, panting. "I can't believe it," she whispered, voice laced with astonishment. "We actually got away?" "Someone else was after the Empire," Silas said, remembering the black sails and flaming catapult. "Whoever they are, they're not allies of the Empire. Perhaps we're not the only ones resisting." Mira's eyes shone under the rim of her hood, a faint flicker of hope showing through the gloom. "That means we're not alone." Adelina's settlement, these raiders. There might be enough people who oppose the Frozen Empire. Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's keep moving. If the stories are true, there's a land further on where the ice receded enough to farm. Maybe we'll find others who have broken free, and once we're strong enough, maybe we can come back." They shared a rare smile in the cold, an unspoken promise binding them. Refusing to let despair crush them, they rigged the skiff once more and continued their trek through the endless expanse of ice. The battered vessel rocked beneath them, forging toward the unknown like a pilgrim on a quest for sacred ground. Days blurred into a haze of driving wind and low-slung sun. They encountered no more patrols, only scattered evidence of battles and raids, scorched patches on the ice, broken skiffs half buried under drifting snow, and battered supply crates abandoned by their owners. Each sight sent a chill through them, but also confirmed that the Frozen Empire's grip was not absolute. There was resistance, fragile but real. At intervals, they struggled with storms so fierce that they could only anchor themselves to outcroppings, forced to crouch under the skiff's hull for shelter. Their rations dwindled, and the unrelenting cold gnawed at them. Yet still they pressed on, day after day, following the faint hope that beyond this wasteland there might be warmth and a fighting chance. At last the wind shifted direction in a way neither had ever experienced before. Its nip grew less biting, and the snow-laden air smelled different, less metallic and more fresh. Ahead, the horizon glowed with a soft haze that was neither day nor the reflection of ice. Silas guided the skiff forward, whispering a silent prayer that their quest wasn't folly. They sailed over a final ridge and came upon a startling vision, a vast valley nestled below, shimmering with color. It wasn't green vegetation as they might have once known, but there were signs of life. A patch of hardy brush, small watery pools at the base of receding ice, and what looked like carefully tended irrigation channels. At the valley's edge, a cluster of dwellings stood, constructed from scavenged materials and nested under a rock overhang. Smoke curled from chimneys. Figures moved near the pools. Mira stared, overwhelmed by the possibility. "It's real," Silas exhaled, a tremor running through him. "We found it. Some measure of hope." He guided the skiff down a gentle slope. As they approached, the people in the valley hurried forward. Silas and Mira prepared themselves, uncertain whether they'd be met with hostility or welcome. But the expressions they found were not those of raiders or conquerors. They were expressions of curiosity and cautious kindness. A tall man with a layered coat signaled for them to come closer. "New travelers?" he asked, voice echoing with an accent shaped by the long winters. "We don't see many. You're welcome here, as long as you don't bring trouble." In that moment, Silas felt the weight of all their hardships lift just a fraction. "We come from the south," he said. "We're hoping to exchange knowledge and share resources. We've been running from the Frozen Empire." The man nodded. "You're not alone in that. We've all fled them, one way or another. Here, we try to rebuild, away from the glacial prisons. We grow what we can, defend ourselves when needed." He gestured to the small settlement. "Come in. We have a fire." Mira managed a small, hopeful smile. Silas squeezed her hand, and they stepped together into the valley. Something akin to warmth brushed against their faces. a defiance of the endless winter. They were not safe yet. Not entirely. The frozen empire loomed far behind, perhaps mobilizing its forces to reclaim any who dared to escape. But as they ventured into this sheltered sanctuary, they carried more than just meager supplies. They carried the seeds of a future that could challenge the empire's inevitability. Somewhere behind them, endless plains of ice and oppression stretched on, crisscrossed by battles and imprisonments. Yet here, in this pocket of possibility, survivors had carved out a place to stand, to endure, and perhaps even to dream again. Silas and Mira needed no final words to declare their resolve. They would stay, learn, grow stronger, and one day, if they could, they would sail back into that frozen darkness, the memory of warm fires and free people burning in their hearts. A promise that not even glaciers could imprison hope forever.